Good evening, I'm Helen McCabe with the Garvan Research Board, and with me is Dr. Dorit Samocha-Bonet. We're here tonight to talk about obesity and the epidemic levels of obesity and potentially a piece of research that might provide some of the answers. Garvan, with its incredible history of research, is about to embark on an interesting study into the link between obesity and the gut. But it will need funding and it will need your support. So as we continue tonight's discussion, I ask you to consider donating to the Garvan Research Foundation. Dr. Dorit, thank you for joining us. You were a dietitian before you became a researcher. Tell me why you became so interested in obesity, and was there any one case that captured your heart or imagination?
What I really wanted to be when I was younger is a ballet dancer. So surrounded by many people caring about what they ate and their physical appearance, when it came to choosing my subject at the university, there was one subject I was going to choose, and that was dietetics. I've served as a dietitian for longer than a decade, and the patients I saw in the clinic were mostly people struggling with having with the consequences of being overweight or obese, being hypertensive, having high bad cholesterol and low good cholesterol, having diabetes. And I remember one case in particular of a young man. He was about my age, and he was overweight, even going to the obesity mark. And he had to lose weight because he started being hypertensive. And he did incredibly well. We succeeded in getting him to lose weight, and he literally shook off the metabolic disease, and he was happy. And then, as it happens a lot of the times, I lost contact with him, and I haven't seen him for 2 years or so. And when he came back, he gained all this weight that he lost, and not just that, he gained possibly 5 to 10 kilograms more. And again, the metabolic disease raised its head, and he had to start all over again. And having dealt with many other cases like that, with better or with more or less success in getting rid of the metabolic disease, I decided that I probably can do better by my patients if I go back to research and study other ways to optimally treat people with obesity and overweight and the diseases that go with it, because it was really clear to me that the one-size-fits-all approach does not work.
So we know now that obesity is a disease. That's correct?
Yes.
So we also know that some people, no matter how hard they try, as you say, can't lose weight.
So most people actually can lose weight. Losing weight is not the biggest issue. People can lose weight for short periods of time. It's a concentrated effort that you can only go on with for a while. Well, it depends on how much you restrict yourself. And I know of many people who want to severely restrict themselves because they want the results fast and now. And these are unsustainable interventions. Most people cannot go on, no one can go on forever eating less than 1,000 kilocalories. And if you don't restrict yourself as much and you combine this with physical activity, then you're more likely to be successful. But we measure success not in 12 months, not in short periods. We measure success in the long run, in your ability to remain with your healthy weight for 5 years, for 10 years, for a long, long period of time. And that's proven to be harder. The other thing is that I came to realize, and this is documented in the literature, that not everyone who lose weight actually correct prediabetes, diabetes, dyslipidemia, or hypertension. So it's obviously not working for everybody. On average, losing weight, maintaining physical activity, maintaining a healthy weight is absolutely good for you, not just for your metabolic health, but for all other circumstances that go hand in hand with being overweight.
So just going back a little bit, what is pre-diabetes?
Prediabetes is a condition that precedes type 2 diabetes by many, many years. We are all aware of the disease that is type 2 diabetes, and there are some 1.7 million Australians having type 2 diabetes. Prediabetes is affecting around 25-30% of Australian adults.
It's that large?
Yes, it is very. The thing with prediabetes is that it goes undiagnosed for a very long period of time, and it's mostly diagnosed incidentally. You'd go to the doctor because you have other symptoms unrelated to prediabetes, and they send you off to a blood test, and the results come back with raised blood sugar, blood glucose.
Are there any symptoms that anyone watching tonight should look out for in terms of prediabetes?
Well, having prediabetes is, first of all, and diabetes is it runs in families, so it's genetic. So if you know you have a first-degree relative with type 2 diabetes, you are at risk. If you're a woman and you had gestational diabetes, you are at risk. If you are not maintaining a healthy weight, you are overweight or obese. If you are running about your life, not having time to exercise, then you are at risk of developing prediabetes and type 2 diabetes.
All right, so then let's talk about sugar, because it's a hot issue at the moment. We all need to quit it. It's bad, it's poison, etc., etc. Tell me about what you understand sugar to mean for people in terms of prediabetes and in terms of weight gain.
So the thing about, if we're talking about sugar in the diet, we eat whole foods, we eat meals. We don't eat sugar on its own in most cases, so we eat food that would have fat, protein, and carbohydrates in it. The problem is, and I'll talk about sugar in the diet, but what I want to talk about for a moment is how we respond to these carbohydrates in the diet. So we eat the carbohydrates and they break down to sugars, and after a meal we have a rise in our blood sugar. And this is the time where people with prediabetes and diabetes, they're exposed to very high rises of blood sugar. They go unnoticed because we don't measure our blood sugar level after a meal. And if you think about it, most of the day we are after a meal, 1 hour, 2 hours, or 3 hours after a meal. We only fast at night. So when we eat, blood sugar rise, and we usually don't even know about it. It's asymptomatic. There's a healthy level of blood sugar rise, and there's a more a pathological level.
We know about it in children. We can see it in children that because they become more active. Is that right?
Well, we think we know it on children, and we think that it relates to them having a very sugary, sweet treat. But it's only when these little devices were developed where you can measure, this little device can measure your blood sugar every 15 minutes,
wow,
that we realized that we're not all responding the same. And a study that came from my collaborators at the Weizmann Institute was quite revolutionary, because what they showed there, we actually knew that not all people respond the same way to the same food. But what they did, they had a very controlled study where they measured exactly how many carbohydrates they gave to people, and they gave it in different forms. So for instance, if they gave a banana or a cookie to two different individuals on 2 separate days at the same time, then they found that one person would have a big rise to the cookie and a very blunt rise to the banana, as you may expect. Mm-hmm. But they found other people, they were not the majority, but other people who actually had a big rise to the banana and almost no rise of their blood sugar in response to the cookie. And then what they did, they aligned this information with information coming from the gut microorganisms. And we'll talk about the gut microorganisms in a moment, I'm sure. But what they found is that people who had a big rise to the cookie actually had similar characteristics of the gut microbiota, and it was different to the ones documented in people having a rise to the banana and no rise to the cookie.
And is this the crux of your research about the individual reactions to sugar and its link to the gut?
Yes. So if you're diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, you will most likely be treated with metformin. Metformin is widely prescribed, it's a safe medication, and many people respond to it. However, some 20 to 40% of people with diabetes or with prediabetes are non-responders to this medication and have to go on to another medication to solve their prediabetes or diabetes. So we don't quite know how metformin is working. It's been around, prescribed for diabetes for 60 years now, celebrated 60 years last year. But we're still figuring out how it works. We think it works in 2 main mechanisms. One, it improves the way our liver responds to the prime regulator of our blood sugar, the hormone insulin. And secondly, we think it changes the gut microbiota to a more favorable, healthier gut microbiota. So what we would like to achieve in the PREDICT study is to see whether if we personalize the diet based on the gut microbiota, are we getting a better response to this old, very safe medication, metformin? And secondly, we would like to find out whether we can predict who is more likely to respond to metformin based on the gut microbiota composition, as well as other markers, traditional markers, body weight and body fat markers. So this is what we're trying to do, and we do it with collaborators at the Weizmann Institute that have the skills and this special personalized diet based on the gut microbiota. So yeah.
Just to be clear, that therefore means you potentially can link that research into the clients that you used to see who suffered from the disease of obesity.
Absolutely, yes.
And how have you linked those 2 bits? Like, how have you linked the gut micro action to actual obesity, like the next that quite substantial leap from general weight gain to the disease of obesity?
Yeah, so there's a leap there, you're right, and this is a gap we wish to fill in knowledge. We know that the gut microbiota is crucial for gastrointestinal conditions. The field of gut microbiota in relation to obesity, energy regulation, type 2 diabetes, this is a very, very new field. So we are still learning about the relationship between the gut microbiota and being overweight or having type 2 diabetes. We think that gut microbiota play a role, but we have not quite showed that. So we take it a step further to actually try and manipulate the gut microbiota or study the snapshot of the gut microbiota in relation to disease or in relation to the way you're going to respond to a particular medication.
And is that how sugar becomes relevant? We know, because sugar's been a fad thing, that it's bad for your gut. I think we know that. Is that how sugar links into this narrative?
Look, I'll say straightforward that sweet drinks and sugar eaten out of its food context is not good for anyone. But we also know that some people are not doing as bad as others when it comes to a fruit, for instance. So we've been measuring the response, the blood sugar response, days over days on people, and they were eating lots of different things. Some were heavy on carbohydrate and some were lower carbohydrate food, and the responses were wide and different. So we know that we're not all doing badly with sugar, and of course it depends on the context. We used to think that wholemeal bread is better for everybody, and we should never consider white bread if we can take the wholemeal bread. But we now know that some people actually are doing quite okay with the white bread, and not as well when it comes to your sugar rise after a meal with the wholemeal bread. We know that the sugar rise is not after meals is not only related to your chances of developing diabetes. We also know from large cohort studies that it actually relates directly to mortality. So it's a predictor of mortality, the way people respond to meals when we measure the blood sugar.
So just the little patch on your arm, can you just tell people watching exactly what it's doing, and is it part of your PREDICT research specifically, or can I just go and pick up one at the chemist and wander around and measure my sugar levels?
Yeah, definitely. So this is a tool we're using in the PREDICT study, and many other studies interested in this topic are using it, because it gives us an opportunity to actually have a read of sugar every 15 minutes. It has a hairpin needle that sits underneath my skin, and it's a revolutionary thing that we use mainly in children with type 1 diabetes and patients with type 2 diabetes. But in research settings, it's very useful for us, and yes, we are using it. It's also available for consumers, but mostly if you have type 1 diabetes.
So a personalised diet, I know your research is still underway, obviously, and that's why we're talking tonight, but what do we know about personalised diets? What more can you tell us? Do you have any indication of, is there a diet that is all meat or all dairy or all legumes? How are you thinking about that at the moment?
So personalised diet in any field is, again, a very young area of research. So again, we're still learning. What we do know is that we should probably stop asking the question, what diet is good for human beings? Or what diet is good for a person with type 2 diabetes? What we should be asking is, what diet is good for you to avoid type 2 diabetes? What diet is good for you to lose weight? Because we know it's going to be different from one person to the other. We're using the gut microbiota as a readout. You can throw into the model circulating biomarkers. You can throw into the model your genetic makeup. And the sky is the limit of what we can actually study. However, it's early days, if you ask me, if there's a way to for an individual to know what exactly they should be eating. Just this. I can't recommend anything that I'll say, yes, you send.
Because it could be anything from the combination at which time, it could be a whole variety of things.
Absolutely. One way to personalize your diet is to actually monitor how you feel after eating. Well, you can't quite feel your blood sugar rise, so it's irrelevant for type 2 diabetes or prediabetes. However, many people have gastrointestinal reactions to certain types of foods, and it's very individual. They can react like this to dairy. That's the most common example. People who do not do that well with dairy products, and someone else can react like this to legumes. So it's very different, and the way to individualize your diet before you go on to the most sophisticated tools that we're still working on is to actually listen to your body.
We're going to take some questions from the audience, but I have to ask you about fat, because we know about sugar and we've gone through lots of phases, and we know the gut research is at the forefront of what we understand around weight loss at the moment. But can you give anyone a bit of guidance around the consumption of fat as well? So,
as I said, we eat whole foods, and we eat the food with its fat and carbohydrate and protein, unless when we eat avocado, which is mostly fat, or when we eat fruit, which is mostly sugar. So there are so many different types of fat, and speaking about fat in general is wrong. We know that the saturated fat coming from processed meat, for instance, is definitely not good for anyone. It's not good for atherosclerosis, for the health of our heart. But on the other hand, we know that nuts and avocado and olive oil, or the fat typically consumed in the Mediterranean diet, is really healthy for us. So fat is different from fat, and we have to relate to it in the right context.
So I was starving before I joined here, and I had a few nuts and a piece of cheese.
Well, that's the best way. No, not bad at all, no.
Richard has asked, how do I find out what gut microbiota I have?
So Richard, you can probably find online commercial entities which will very gladly ask you to send a sample of your gut microbiota, which is very simple to collect.
But that's not particularly helpful unless you know what to do with it, right?
Exactly. So you'll send it, and you'll get back a breakdown of composition of microorganisms that are typically associated with health versus microorganisms that are typically associated with type 2 diabetes or being overweight or obese. But is it actionable? Do we know what you need to eat to actually transform your gut microbiota from the bad guys to the good guys? Well, we actually don't quite know at the moment. What we do know that it's probably very individual, and you may have the same makeup of bacteria and organisms in your gut, but like someone else, but very likely that you're not going to be benefiting from the exact same diet.
And this might be a question you can't answer as well, so apologies in advance, but is it a process? Is it important how you eat for all of your life? Like, does your childhood diet impact potentially, or is it something you can turn around pretty quickly?
We know that our eating habits from early childhood and even from when we are in our mother's womb are very important for our future health. We know that there are studies done mainly in animal models and associative studies in large cohort studies in humans. We know it's important what we eat from a very early age. And having counseled young individuals with overweight and obesity, I remember their parents coming to the clinic and I said, well, you will have to transform your kitchen a little bit. And when you go out for grocery shopping, you'll have to pick the right things and change a little bit. And they used to say, to point to a young sibling in the family and say, but why does he have to be affected? He can eat whatever he wants and he can have whatever food he would like because he's young and it's a treat and etc. So it's very much up to us parents at the beginning to guide our children and to introduce them to healthy food options. But then when we grow up, it's up to us to maintain a healthy diet. And it's quite remarkable how we can actually affect our gut microbiota with a different diet. And it's quick to respond. We can change the gut microbiota within days of different diets.
Is that right?
Yeah.
That quickly?
Very
So
quickly.
that actually brings me to a question from Elaine from Perth. Should I be eating fermented foods like sauerkraut?
Fermented foods are good for us. Yogurt is good for us. Eating the food with the cultures of microorganisms is good for our gut microbiota. If you ask me whether it's good for us to take probiotics in the form of a pill, well, I'll say that certain conditions, definitely, it's proven, mainly diarrhea, Clostridium difficile, so gastrointestinal problems. But in the field of diabetes and obesity, for every study that says, yes, take probiotics, there's a second study that would negate that and say, no, it did not have any effect. And we have to be very mindful about taking probiotics out of context. So if we eat the healthy food that affects our gut microorganisms, that's great, but taking the microorganisms in a pill, that's not proven yet.
So what does yogurt actually do to the microorganisms in your gut?
So it enriches the gut microorganisms in the gut with the specific with the specific cultures of microorganisms in the yogurt. Yes. You have to eat the yogurt with the bioculture, which is. But I'm not sure that there are, controlled studies looking at it. But it's yummy, right? So
it can't do any harm.
No, eat it plain, no sugar in it, and
kombucha, which is the latest fad when it comes to your gut microorganisms. Agree, that's good too. Go for it.
Well,
as long as it hasn't got too much sugar in it.
Fermented food is good for you. You may have to make it yourself rather than buy the sauerkraut out at the shops, because we don't quite know what's in it after, it sits on shelf for a long time. And so, but it's really easy to make.
Well, that's on its side. Lucy from Tamworth says, how would I know if I have prediabetes? Now, we sort of touched on this at the beginning, but do you want to just quickly go through that again?
Well, as I said, if you had gestational diabetes, Lucy, if you have a family history of type 2 diabetes, if you are overweight and don't quite find the time to exercise and raise your heart rate on a regular basis, then you may ask your GP for a test. And what we do is we measure fasting blood glucose as well as you can also measure your response to a very sweet glucose drink after 2 hours. And also we can measure hemoglobin A1C, which is a marker of 3 months sugar control, your body sugar control. And there are certain levels that would be considered pre-diabetes, or the one level up from that is type 2 diabetes.
Dorit, we are going to run out of time, but I just need to finish up and say your research is underway. What do you need now? What can we do to help you?
Well, we are seeking the community involvement in many different ways. You can participate in our studies, you can spread the word about our studies and recommend it to relatives whom you think have prediabetes or early diabetes. You can also donate if you can, because...
You should definitely donate. The Garvan Research Foundation does extraordinary work and extraordinary research. So I would urge you to consider that. Continue.
Yeah, because with your donations, we can actually get the preliminary data that we need to then go to the government bodies and say, look, we found this and it's really promising, and now we want to take it a step further and get large sums of money to recruit large cohorts of individuals to test our hypothesis.
Which potentially, well, not potentially, it will in one way or another eventually help save lives and help alleviate some of the misery that exists for people who find themselves caught with the disease, caught in the trap of a disease called obesity. Is that fair to say?
It's very fair to say, yes.
Dr. Dorit, thank you so much for telling us all about that. It's the most fascinating area, which I'm sure everyone would agree. And I would thank you all for tuning in to us this evening. And again, my name's Helen McCabe and I'm on the board of the Garvan Research Foundation. And I would urge you to consider donating to the foundation in order to create a legacy like the one we just described. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Helen.
Thank you.